Welcome, everyone. I have a very special guest with us here this evening out of Wisconsin. This is David Perrodin, who has been employed as a Director of Student Services for various school districts and has overseen special education, counseling, nursing, social work services, and most importantly, in my opinion, school safety. And that seems to be an issue that's really come to the forefront. But I want to share the rest of his bio because it is quite intricate. He's done a lot of amazing work. He's also worked as a speech language pathologist, school principal, and director of rehabilitation. Outside of his work within the K-12 environment, he's a core faculty member with Viterbo University's educational leadership, special education, and reading programs. He's developed and instructed special education, pupil services, inclusion, restorative practices, and applied research graduate level courses. In addition, David has been invited to guest lecture for graduate students at the University of Wisconsin in Madison on the topic of school crisis preparedness exercises. Mr. Perrodin is currently completing his Ph.D. Congratulations on that. That is an incredible achievement in educational leadership and policy analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research embarks on the study of high-stakes safety decision-making across military, medical, and educational environments. David currently serves as the speech language pathologist and therapy department chairperson for the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that work before we kind of engage in our main topic of discussion. But welcome, David. How are you?
I'm great. Joe, thanks for the wonderful introduction and always glad to be back and sharing time with the Sprigeo audience. And yes, it's an incredible experience right now for me to be working for the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. The campus itself is 1/4 of a mile long and completely connected. So there are dorms, an indoor track, a pool, auditorium, and it's really a family structure. But it presents very unique challenges to putting together a safe environment when you have students, again, who are visually impaired. So it brought me back to kind of my roots into universal design and working with a tremendous staff at the facility to put together what I feel is a tremendous model on how to respond if we did have a safety event that happened on campus, and empower our students, empower our staff. And it's something too that I think we can share with other schools across the country and that they can use or at least consider with their schools. But yeah, it's been a real wonderful opportunity for me to look at safety in a completely different perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredible opportunity, and with a full set of resources that are available there, and just a unique experience and environment to be able to look at the issue of school safety. So,
right, and one of the things too, Joe, is the issue of reporting, when you don't have the ability to see. So making sure that you have universal design built into a reporting system.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a pleasure to have your expertise on that on an ongoing basis, and to be able to not only call you a colleague, but a friend. And so I know one of the main reasons why you and I came together now was to talk a little bit about the new Office for Civil Rights requirements, and commonly and affectionately known to some of us as the OCR, or not so affectionately, depending on where you are in the world. But you have a diverse perspective in that you are not only a researcher, but you're a practitioner, and you've been across many levels of schooling. And so I think your perspective is with a very wide range of lenses that not everyone has. And so, as you start to look at some of the changes that have come to these new OCR requirements, what are some of the things that you've come across in your role as a researcher?
Well, Joe, just recently I've had the opportunity to interview some additional elementary principals, and there's a theme that's starting to appear that I haven't seen before across schools and principals. Well, first of all, let me back up a little bit just to make sure everybody's clear. The new OCR requirements really change where there is a section for motivating factors. So trying to figure out what the causal factors were for the bullying, harassment, discrimination event. So that's new. That wasn't there. That wasn't there before. Personally, I think it's a brilliant move by OCR. I really like the direction they're going, not only in this aspect, but I'll talk about some other changes that OCR, and then also the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is being reformed at the moment, and looks like that's going to open the door for some incredible opportunities for schools to take the reins at a school building level on school safety, and then also on school safety input systems and reporting. So one of the things right now, though, Joe, is schools traditionally are still doing the tell an adult as the reporting system. And I've worked with a lot of schools in the last few months, and that is the model that is still out there. Schools, though, are very aware that that model needs to change. And they're starting to look at whether it be an online reporting system, or if it works through some anonymous other type of reporting. Sometimes you'll hear a note that might be put into a box in the counselor's office and things like that. But I think people are looking beyond that, though, to really get a system which captures that data in an electronic record, and then something that they can go back to and they can use it to meet the OCR requirements, which again, the reporting of these motivating factors. So it's an exciting time, because tell an adult is really fading. It's there, it's strong right now, but schools know that that's not the model that they're going to keep. So they're excited. And right now, Joe, for really probably the first time during my research, principals are telling me that they are meeting with their counselors, with their psychologists, social workers, about once a month, and going over office referral data. And I guess what they're doing is identifying how a few things, what's trending, and then also how they respond it. And a third part of that, which is a big part of my study, is called heuristics. And heuristics is how many options you have available to you. How many options are on the table when things happen? And then how do you bring those options down? And also, how do you get together and say, we need more options, such as bringing in community partners? That's an example. And under Obamacare, hospitals that are not-for-profit every other year need to do a complete community needs assessment, and they partner with school districts on that. So if you went in and Googled, you're going to start to see that partnership evolve, and it's coming from the hospital into the school. And that's also bringing in some new players into the school system, such as mental health providers and medical providers for dental or other needs. So it's nice to see that not be driven from the school side, because the schools have done a tremendous amount of work, but it seems they've always had to lead the charge. And now, people are reaching out to them for partnerships. So that's exciting. So yeah, schools are looking at their referral data, their discipline referral. However, Joe, it's not always the OCR data. So it's a little bit of a mismatch there. So that's where we have to get things lined up.
So these new requirements, you mentioned motivating factors, and that wasn't in place before. And I know that I've heard from some of the school districts that we work with that they are now being requested by the OCR to report on an annual basis new information about the student who's been targeted, for example, in a bullying or harassment type of incident. And maybe you could share with us a little bit about this new data that's required. And my thought is, isn't this the same type of information that you're capturing when there's suspension reporting, or is it different?
Yeah, it is different, and it's also different in timing. A lot of the data that you're talking about traditionally that OCR has collected has been at the end of a school year, and it's an aggregate set of data for all of the schools served by that district, or if it's a parish or a county, however the structure is. But so it all comes into one, and it's all put together and then submitted forward into the state system and to the Fed. So it happens at the end of the school year. What's happening now under OCR is the reporting is moving up toward real-time reporting. It's moving up toward, again, the start of the school year and real-time reporting. And it is taking it from this whole group of here's what happened at a district. So you're not looking at numbers anymore. You're not looking at, okay, we had 17 of this and 5 of this. You're looking at an individual student profile and then working through that profile to look at how you responded to it, what a motivating factor is, and then the actions that were taken to address that motivating factor. That's a key change because it gets at root causes. And what was happening before is when the data came into to OCR at the end of the year, that was really data that, well, first of all, it's old, but it's looking more at direct causes. And you mentioned suspension. So suspension data, Joe, I've done a lot of statistical analysis with suspension data. It was going to be a part of my research, and actually I just kicked it out because it's not valid. And the U.S. Department of Ed knows this. If you go in and look at the congressional hearings, Kenneth Trump is one of the national experts on school safety, and he has testified multiple times saying, hey, the data for school violence isn't accurate. And it's not, and here's the reason it's not accurate. What the feds have done really is they've said that you need to act in the best interest of the child. That's what the direction that they give to the states. It is up to the states then to determine how to do that and what they're going to put together and what they're going to report out. So I'm going to go back to best interest of the child. I looked at a research study that examined 60 legal cases that hinged on defining best interest of the child. All 60 cases came up with different definitions. So we have a situation, almost a crisis situation where we have a handoff to the states of saying put together a reporting system and really no direction on how to do that. And here's what happens, Joe, when things like that are allowed to filter down from the feds. This is a document, and it's from North Carolina, and this is nothing against the folks at North Carolina that put this together, but this is done for 2005, 2016 on how to report discipline data in the state. And if you can tell, it's pretty heavy here. I'm getting my workout. But I specifically went in and I was going through some of the appendix sections, and they have 114 behavior options that you can report on within this document. And there are other sections. So, and two of them, one is gambling, and another one is affray, which actually I had to look up, and that means 2 or more people fighting in public, and it's a type of disorderly conduct. Now, I've been involved in this pretty closely for a big portion of my life, and I didn't know what that meant. So, and you look at some of these things, and I appreciate it's comprehensive, but prevalence-wise, it's going to be low prevalence data, like gambling. So you start, just because you can collect the data doesn't mean you should collect the data. And so this is what happens. And I think what OCR is doing right now by moving into the motivating factors And actually, Joe, I'm holding up a couple things, but OCR's reporting form for a complaint is very well done. I mean, it's very succinct. It's nothing at all, that you would think would go along with what I just displayed from, from North Carolina. So OCR is getting it. They are really understanding that, hey, we can't be a mile wide and an inch deep. We've got to get this down to where it's manageable, and that's what they're doing. But so these data systems, they get really elaborate. We hear about big data and all the stuff that you can collect, which is true, and schools jump on that. But again, you collect a lot of very low prevalence data, and you collect data that's not necessarily reliable and valid. Suspension data, the reasons why suspension data is completely irrelevant. One is you're looking at stuff that's 2 to 3 years old by the time it's verified and comes out at a state or federal level. Suspension data has a lot of extraneous circumstances associated with it, and I'm going to give a really interesting example. But first, I want to talk about a data set that I looked at a state level. And it literally had a middle school that went from 200 suspensions in 1 year to the next year 5. And so you ask, how can that happen? How was it a mistaken entry? Whatever. But what's happening, Joe, is schools aren't reporting suspensions out anymore to the level that they were, because it's something that has kind of been used and turned against schools a little bit. If what your suspension rate is versus your neighboring district, and it's viewed in a very negative way. And so schools are using things such as abeyance agreements, pre-expulsion, changes to placement with the IEP, other ways to kind of accomplish the same thing. But here's a very interesting case I want to share. There was a principal that was definitely acting in the best interest of the child. And he was doing that because he suspended the child 30 times. And you might ask yourself, how is that acting in the best interest of the child? The principal, the police, and the parents were all on the same page and working with the county. And what they were told by the county was, the only way your son is going to get the help, the county services that he needs, is if he is bad enough to rise to the top of the list. So make the referrals, make the police calls, do the suspensions, and make it look as bad as you can. So in that case, you have a principal who's acting in a partnership with the parents to really try to navigate a system which is broken, but this is the way you have to steer through this. It's a mysterious swamp, but there's a way to get through it. But that principal on paper is going to look horrible, and that school is going to look horrible. So it's a metric that that isn't reflective. And the cleaning systems for that data to go through, and the algorithms to clean out, the things like that errant data, those really don't exist either. So once you start to put a couple poison ingredients into the pie, it doesn't take long before it works up to a federal level, and then nothing. It has no use.
That's amazing. I mean, what an incredible story. That I'm sure most of the folks that are listening to this, watching this now, are thinking, well, that would never happen where I'm at. And again, I'm sure an extreme example, but as folks start to look at suspension data, and they start to look at now the pressure that a lot of states are putting on schools to find alternatives to suspension, it's not really that hard to imagine that an example like the one that you shared could exist. Where at the outset, I think it kind of sounds as though it's unbelievable, but I think if you work through it and you look at some of the trends that are happening today, it's really not that hard to imagine. But you started to mention a little bit about, the data input systems and how data is collected, and the fact that there's so much data now, right? Really without much context. And I think one of the things that I'm curious about, I know a lot of the folks that are watching this now are, what does it mean to really create an effective input system that is going to be able to provide you as a school administrator with the information you need, but not be too complicated or burdensome for students? I mean, what would that look like? I know I'm kind of leading you towards what we do at Sprigeo, and you obviously are very familiar with what we do as a reporting and documentation system. But I think for people listening to this and watching this, just to reiterate the fact that data collection is not an easy task if you're trying to do it correctly.
No, absolutely not. When you have states that want a lot of data, and then also school districts that want a lot of data, when they put together collection systems, input systems, what they're doing is they're asking for a lot of information from typically the student. Let's say the student is going to be using that input system. They're asking a lot of information from the student. And there's a few problems with that. Is one, we were both students. If you have to complete a 3-page form, you're not going to report it. That's not going to happen. The other part is we have students with intellectual disabilities, English language learners, and once you start to create, jargon and a form that is, typically probably more than a page long, that's also going to be a barrier to reporting. And so this is what I definitely say. The reporting system is the equivalent of pulling the fire alarm, because the investigation needs to happen by the professionals trained to do that investigation, the principals and whoever the principals designate to do that, to come in and then do the appropriate investigation of if it was an act of bullying, harassment, school safety, instead of having some of those questions start to come over into the reporting form itself, because that's a barrier. So that's definitely what I see as a pitfall into systems that are being built, is that they are being built and front loading. Part of that investigation is one foot is on the shoulder of that student, and the student should not be investigating. And like I said, Joe, it's the same thing. I mean, it's not comfortable to report. I mean, it just isn't. So to add a barrier to that of making it also, a task where you have to decipher information and kind of put a lot of, maybe things into that report, which, you're not sure exactly what you're submitting for terminology and whatever. It doesn't work. Again, it's a fire alarm approach. And I've changed on that perspective. I was more in the camp of trying to get as much information up front because it would be more current. But that's not working. That's not effective. And even when I meet with principals and kids are coming forward to teachers, that process is even difficult to encourage students to do that through, PBIS videos and other things. So what I see, Joe, is I see a very user-friendly, streamlined system for students, parents, whoever to access. And then on the other side of that becomes the OCR motivating factors, what the investigation details, that all gets entered. And then, of course, that OCR data can be used directly for the OCR report. Some states have state reports on school safety. Wisconsin has Act 309. It's an annual report that needs to be given to the school board. That can be pulled right out of that dashboard that's on the other side. So, I have another interesting kind of parallel. So we've watched the NFL, and one of the things right now in the NFL is the referees they're struggling with instant replay, and they've come out and said what was once a fluid motion, catching a ball or having 2 feet in bounds or whatever, now is split up because of technology into 100 pieces. And we're doing the same thing at a societal level. So the researcher's name is Steve Kastner. He's out of NASA. And I looked right away on Amazon and thought, did he write a book? But he didn't. He's written a number of white papers and some great stuff. So Steve needs to get out there and write a book, because he is a brilliant man and has a lot to share. But what he's saying again is, if we get too fractured, if we get too focusing too much on every single dissecting into every single second of something that happened, you lose the whole of it. And that's something too that is going to bog down administrators and cause something that I'm seeing, which I'm calling decision fatigue. I didn't look for it in research, and all of a sudden it started to show up in coding. And that is when administrators get tied into so many ancillary details in investigating. And again, we saw the North Carolina document, and I mean, it would take me a course to figure this out. I mean, I just don't know. There's so many things that principals have on their plate that they have to figure out. But what principals are telling me, Joe, is when the system is complicated for them and they're not sure what to report out and how to interpret things, it kind of wipes them out. So it takes sometimes 2, 3, 4 days for them to, recover and kind of get that edge back on their decision making, which is very surprising. I didn't expect to hear that. But I would ask questions and say, after a big event where you've been required to submit all of this data and collect all of this, if you come back the next day, whether it be a meeting on adopting curriculum or whatever, do you feel your decision making is just as sharp as it was the day before? Each one says, no matter what I did. Took a walk, got out, saw a movie. It still is, I'm still going through that. It's too much. But that, Joe, is where OCR is coming in and really cleaning things up. And here's something that is amazing. The Elementary, Secondary, and ESEA, Elementary Secondary Education Act, formerly known as No Child Left Behind. So No Child Left Behind is basically being scrapped. And the legislation that's replacing it, and this is right now, I mean, this is happening at the moment, it's allowing schools to develop some of their own performance indicators. This has never happened before. And specifically within the legislation, you can create a performance indicator for your school that would be on climate, could be on behavior, referrals or school safety, whatever it is. But you have that option now for school climate and connectedness, where that was completely ignored before. Schools would get report cards. In my state, the school report card, where the state would grade the school, it was math and science, and then it was closing gaps. But now you have that element. And I brought this up in my May 2013 PBS presentation, that we don't look at school connectedness as much as we need to. So the best reporting systems and what they bring to a school, and then by using the data, for example, from a Sprigeo dashboard and creating programs then to benefit students and benefit staff that are driven by the data, that wasn't, I guess, rewarded or acknowledged. And now it's going to be. So it's exciting, and it should be, because in 2009, the Centers for Disease Control came out with an extensive research study, compilation of many studies, and the number one factor in a safe school and for kids to feel safe and engaged is school connectedness, that they feel safe in school. And there's, it's alarming with the amount of mass shootings that have gone on, and just recently, out in California by you, and it seems, it's almost daily you hear of something. So there's this other concept, Joe, called leakage. And leakage is where little bits of information start to come out ahead of time if someone is a student at risk for harm to themselves or harm to others. social media is saturated with so much communication from kids, and we need better systems to detect leakage and encourage the reporting of leakage. So leakage could be if there's a post saying, I wouldn't be at school tomorrow at 10 o'clock, if I were you, or something, something to that effect. And these little bits of information that if they're identified and they can get into the right input system, so again, that system has to be accessible, then there can be a response. And that, to make sure that safety is preserved, and that student also, might get the help that they need if it's a mental health situation and something like that. So systems have not been designed to capture leakage, but actually, Joe, you've done a nice job, Sprigeo. I commend you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And David, you were always a wealth of knowledge. This evening was no different. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to prepare. You're always very knowledgeable in what you bring to the conversation. I felt like having you on this tonight was particularly relevant, given not only what I'm starting to hear about those new OCR requirements, but also in the new legislation that's happening. That before we got started tonight on this interview, I shared with you, I said, this is going to be the first time that many of these folks are even hearing about new legislation. It'll probably be next fall before any of it, really comes to fruition. But just to be able to hear about it now, front load some of that information and give folks a heads up on what's coming, I think a lot of people will appreciate. And I'm always just so thankful to be able to spend a couple minutes with you. I'm sure we'll have you on again as new things come to light, but I just want to take a couple minutes to really appreciate you, appreciate the work that you do, the research, and the impact that it's having now in the lives of kids and parents and communities everywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Joe, and I also want to send an appreciation to OCR and to the legislators who have looked at the ESEA and have said it's time to make some reforms that are really going to benefit make a big impact on school safety and the school safety environment. It's happening, mm-hmm. And we're going to see it within the next few months, and especially over the next year.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you again, David.
Okay, thank you, Joe.